Hey guys, Tom Barclay here outside Tottenham Hotspur's training ground. Back with a video, haven't done one for a couple of days. Half term this week, but also I've been feeling pretty rough, as you can probably tell from my voice. And if you've listened to the Tottenham Way the other day, I was pretty much off my sick bed. But anyway, back here after a Ange Postecoglou press conference, another one, not quite as many as there were before most of this season, but now we have one ahead of Ipswich Town on Saturday. And I guess top of the shop before we get into the details was the Europa League draw. So we know it's AZ Alkmaar, the dream of San Sebastian, unfortunately, sadly has died because it's Alkmaar they've drawn, a team that Tottenham have already played this season in the Europa League, won 1-0. It was actually a game I missed because I was on holiday during that period, but I remember it being the main storyline from that 1-0 victory was it being sort of Mikey Moore's emergence in that particular game. And it seems like since then Alkmaar have improved quite a lot. And the first question Andrew was asked today was about the draw, and he did point out the fact that they come through quite impressively against Galatasaray in the playoff. And Galatasaray obviously are a team that Spurs know well how dangerous they are, given that they lost pretty convincingly to Galatasaray in the league phase. Scoreline was 3-2, but trust me, having been there, Spurs, or admittedly quite a young Spurs side, did seem to wilt under the pressure at the Galatasaray stadium, which is something to behold, to be honest, the noise from that stadium. And 3-2 was a very flattering scoreline. It really should have been, if it weren't for an excellent Fraser Forster performance in terms of saving, it could have been 5 or 6 they conceded from that particular game. So fair play to AZ Alkmaar and Troy Parrott in particular, coming through that tie to set up a fixture in the last 16 against Spurs. But let's be honest, this is a match, particularly with the tie being the first leg being away from home, that Spurs should be pretty confident they can come through it without taking them lightly. This is a pretty good draw for Spurs. And it's interesting seeing how the draw opens up now, because you know how it's going to work in terms of the following rounds. If they get through against Alkmaar, it will then be either Ajax or Eintracht Frankfurt, two teams that they've played recently in European competition, one more famous than the other. Frankfurt was, I think might have been a 0-0 draw or 1-1. I remember being at Frankfurt, another stadium where you could barely hear yourself think because of the atmosphere generated by the Frankfurt fans in the Champions League. But it was the Ajax, obviously very memorable, kind of before my time covering Spurs, but one of the most unforgettable matches in recent English Champions League history, where obviously Spurs came from looking dead and buried right at the end. Lucas Moura scores the hat-trick at the Amsterdam Stadium to take the Spurs through to the Champions League final back in 2019. And then after that, it's obviously a raft of different teams from Bodo Glimt. I'd have to go through the whole team now, I can't quite think off the top of my head, but Lazio definitely seemed like the most dangerous team, at least on paper, that they could face. But there's no point in getting ahead of ourselves on that front at the moment. It's just AZ Alkmaar to start off with. But obviously before them, they've got a couple of games in the Premier League first, starting with Ipswich on Saturday, which is tomorrow. The team used to start off with for the Spurs squad for that particular game begins with everyone being okay from who played last time out against Man United, which was their second win in a row, second clean sheet in a row in the Premier League. I remember in that game, Kevin Danso, Rodrigo Bentancur and Son Heung-min, the captain, all came off with knocks. But Ange said they've all come through okay, so they should all be expecting all three of them to be involved on Saturday. It doesn't feel like anyone who was injured in that ahead of that game will be back in time. In fact, he's given a bit more of a timeline on the recoveries of the other 6 players out. Obviously, we know Radek Dragusin's out long term with the ACL. He didn't mention Timo Werner, so but the fact that he said there was no one else sort of ready back from who was injured against Man United suggests that he probably won't make it. I suppose there's a question mark whether he would get on the bench at this point or not anyway. That is part of it. But yeah, on Van der Ven and Romero, who are obviously the key centre-backs getting back in time, he said that he thought that they should be back in time for in and around that Europa League first leg, which is something that he sort of said last week, so just sort of reiterating that. But one thing he did mention that he felt Solanke and Richarlison, not too far behind, got the sense from that particular line that maybe they wouldn't be fit for that first leg on March the 6th at Alkmaar, which is a bit of a shame because it felt like last week it seemed like potentially he'd have a fully fit squad, barring Dragazin, for that particular fixture, but maybe not for Solanke and Richarlison. Romero has been for his scan. He didn't go into detail over it, he just said it was going well and he's in a good place, and it's about picking the moment for when bringing Van der Ven and Romero back into the team to the point where they will stay fit for the rest of the year. Just kind of reiterating what he said before, but he also said the next couple of games with Ipswich and then Man City at home on Wednesday next week ahead of a free weekend, because they're obviously not in the FA Cup anymore, before that Alkmaar game was a good chance to get some minutes in some of the players' legs. The likes of Brennan Johnson, the likes of Destiny Udogie, who suggested both of those I think have got a good chance of starting this game. He's mentioned Wilson Odobert, the possibility of having both of them. That's very quick cars around here. He mentioned Wilson Odobert also trying to get minutes into his legs, but did sort of hint, I suppose, that it might take a bit longer with him given how long he's been out for. So I'd probably be less expectant of him starting against Ipswich, but hey, let's see. He reiterated again about the importance of training with a clear week, like he's had in the last couple of weeks because of not having quite as many games. And sort of moved on to Ipswich. So this is a team that inflicted one of the most damaging defeats of Tottenham's season when they beat them 2-1, was it back in November, at home at Spurs. A really disappointing defeat, and one that is quite an inconvenient defeat for Ange in terms of his argument that this season his problems have been purely down to injuries, because when you go back and look at the team that played Ipswich, and this is what a lot of fans who have an issue with Ange, and particularly that argument about injuries, point to, they talk about the fact that game it was only Van der Ven missing really from the big hitters, and he was pretty much full strength otherwise. So there's not really an excuse on that front, but to my mind it sort of underlines the strength and quality of the Premier League. But hey, this is Tottenham at home, they can't be losing to a team like Ipswich, so they're going to have to go and make up for it. And he talked about that game and said that Ipswich are organised, they fight for everything, and he talked about how they scored early and Spurs really struggled to sort of reclaim the momentum. They can't let that happen again. And I feel like that's going to be important from Spurs' perspective if they can get a result at Ipswich, to not go through that experience again. Ipswich, funny team, they feel like they're in a real battle to stay up. If anything, away from home they look a bit better than they do at home. Maybe the pressure of being at home is a bit trickier. But in Kieran McKenna they've got a very exciting young coach, they've got some good young players. Liam Delap, obviously, prime example. Amari Hutchinson, I think. The left back, Leif Davis is someone that I really like as well. So they've got some good players and they've got threats, and Tottenham know that already. But obviously Spurs have got some players coming back in recent weeks, like James Maddison, who was good, or the game changer I suppose, against Man United. I actually thought his performance overall was okay, but he obviously scored the goal, and it's great to have him back because he's a decisive player. So he was actually asked about Maddison's chances for England, because the England squad's not far away, and Ange, being a former Australian manager, is never one to sort of tell other international managers what to do and how to pick their players. That's something that is quite a consistent message from a lot of managers, but particularly ones who've had international roles. I remember Roy Hodgson at Crystal Palace often talking like that, like he never wanted to get involved on that kind of thing. But he said with Maddison specifically, his goal right now is to stay healthy. That's the importance of what he needs to do right now, is stay healthy, focus on that. And I couldn't agree with more, really. I mean, Maddison, it's a new manager in Tuchel, so maybe he fancies him, and that could be a game changer. But with the amount of competition they've got in that number 10 role and in central midfield roles, it feels like it's going to be a tough ask anyway at the top of his game. But right now Maddison needs to focus on playing regularly and performing for Tottenham, and then see what happens from there, I suppose. And on that front, he was also asked about, on the front of midfield, he was also asked about Archie Gray and whether essentially he'll ever play in midfield, because that is his preferred position, and that was where he was signed, but basically where he hasn't played all season. And joked at first that no, the way it's going, he won't get a chance, and he thought about playing him in goal when he had all those goalkeeper injuries. But he did basically say he will eventually get his chance there, but I didn't get the sense it was going to be anytime soon. on the words he was saying in the press conference. I mean, it depends how much you can take from what he says publicly compared to what he actually plans on doing, but so far he hasn't really shown much of a desire to play him in that role, mainly due to having to play him in defence. Like even last week when he gave him a rest and he brought him on against United late on, Danso took a knock, so potentially he might have looked to bring him on in midfield in that game, but suddenly with Danso taking a knock, he decided he needed to bring him on and play him in defence. So it feels like the wait's going to go on for a bit longer for Gray to play in that role, and it's an interesting one. It's maybe a proper video for the future to talk about the midfield options that Ange has and how he never really seems to be keen on any of them. He doesn't seem to be settled on any of them. He keeps changing, chopping and changing. A lot of that's due to selection in terms of availability. Obviously Bentancur's suspension, Maddison's injury, but I don't know, I'm just still not quite convinced that he's completely convinced on any of those combinations. And it feels like defensive midfield is a big topic going forward for Tottenham, whether they go and try to solve it in the transfer market in the summer, and that's difficult because there aren't many Rodri types around. They really could do with someone like that to sort of fit what he wants them to do, or they try and do it from within, whether it becomes developing Archie Gray into that position or Lucas Bergvall. But it feels like with Yves Bissouma, he's being given a lot of opportunities and he doesn't really feel like he's the long-term solution. He just lets them down too often, even though when he's on his game he's brilliant there. And Bentancur, I'm not sure really has the discipline to be that holding midfield player. I'm not saying he doesn't have a future at Spurs, but feels like in more of the advanced positions is where he's better. But let's see on that front. On transfer news, I actually did a story earlier this week. I was thinking of doing a video on it, but then I wasn't feeling very well. But it's quite a big name, to be fair. Jamie Gittens is someone that I'd heard about in the January window that Spurs liked. It was a bit of a dream signing, at least at that stage, given that Dortmund in the Champions League and given the stage that Spurs are at. But I am told that they do like him. And it was interesting to see reports in Germany this week, in Bild over there, saying that Spurs, along with I think Arsenal and Chelsea, also being interested in Gittens, who's I'm not sure if he's 19 or 20 now, but he's a youngster at Dortmund who's really broken into the first team there this season, or was a first team regular. He was given big billing by Jude Bellingham only a couple of years ago as a potential Golden Boy winner when Bellingham was winning it then. He's a winger who's come through City's academy, become a regular at Dortmund, who are having a funny old season. They've been pretty dreadful in the league, but they're through to the last 16 via the playoffs of the Champions League. They obviously reached the Champions League final. They lost to Bellingham's Real Madrid in the final last season, with Gittens coming on in that game. He would not be cheap, obviously. You know, you're talking like big figure, maybe even breaking Tottenham's transfer record. So I don't know. It'd be an audacious signing, but he is someone that I'm told they do like. So let's see on that front regarding Jamie Gittens. And talking of players who are playing in Germany or have recently played in Germany, I just wanted to touch on the Matis Tell interview. I thought it was very good on the Tottenham website, talking about just getting to know him a bit better, really. And he talked about that phone call, Postecoglou, which convinced him to sign, Harry Kane's influence in terms of convincing him about the what Tottenham can offer him, particularly with the facilities. And Wilson Odobert, he even named agent Wilson Odobert, obviously a fellow France under-21 international, I think, who basically sounded like he was effectively begging him to come to Tottenham, and helped convince him. So fair play to Odobert, who is back in the frame now after injury, which is exciting. And he also mentioned that he even does a bit of farming with his grandfather back in Guadeloupe. He's born in Paris, but he considers Guadeloupe to be his country, and that was quite a nice, down-to-earth, not forgive the pun, sort of line from about Matis Tell, Tottenham's new loan signing, but who we understand to be signing permanently in the summer. So if you haven't seen that, go check it out. Very good interview with Ben Haynes and Rob Daly. So finally, and on Tell, Ange was asked about him recently, his progress since joining the club. And one of the line that I found quite interesting about Tell is something that I'd noticed was how much he was playing in these early games, like playing the full 90 minutes, which I feel like, given his age and his sort of rustiness from not playing, was kind of revealing over perhaps what he'd been promised when signing, about the amount of game time you'd get. And Ange actually talked about it himself. He said it was He said it's important to build him up at the moment, given his lack of minutes recently, and that's something that that was a very conscious effort from Ange's point of view, to give him lots of minutes at the moment, to try and get him into a place where he can be a really good player get up to speed very, very quickly. So I think we can expect more of that, particularly with Solanke being a little bit longer than we were sort of expecting on that front. So just finally, I suppose, back to Ipswich, looking at a likely lineup. I think there could be a few changes based on what Ange's saying about managing minutes. Vicario in goal, obviously. Wouldn't be surprised if Porro, because he was asked about Porro and Kulusevski by Ali Gold about them being kind of in the red zone from playing so many minutes, and he did sort of suggest that maybe they were due a rest. So I wouldn't be surprised if Spence goes to right back, Doggy starts, Danzo and maybe Davis in the back four, but that would mean Gray wouldn't play if he's not playing midfield, so maybe Gray. That's a tricky one. Maddison again, you would have thought. I think Sarr probably comes back in, and then maybe Bissouma. And then I think Johnson starts, Tell through the middle, and I don't see Odobert starting right away, just because of the sort of length of time he's been out for, but I could be wrong. So I reckon Son on the left. That would be my team. Anyway, let me know your team, what you think, and Spurs' chances of making up for that horrible defeat earlier against Ipswich this season with their game tomorrow, and the possibility of getting 3 wins in a row, and what that would do for their season, or whether the league is so far gone that it almost doesn't matter. I don't know. I mean, obviously form always matters, particularly with regards to the Europa League, which is the key. And in AZ Alkmaar, they've got a real opportunity here. But this could be a big part of Tottenham turning them around, is getting more momentum if they can go and win at Portman Road. So let me know your thoughts. Cheers, guys.